Saudi Arabia has an oil-based economy with strong government control over major economic activities. Saudi Arabia possesses 18% of the world's proven petroleum reserves, ranks as the largest exporter of petroleum, and played a leading role in OPEC for many years. The petroleum sector accounts for almost all of Saudi government revenues and export earnings. Most workers, particularly in the private sector, are foreigners. Economic overview. Saudi oil reserves are the second largest in the world, and Saudi Arabia is the world's leading oil exporter and second largest producer. Proven reserves, according to figures provided by the Saudi government, are estimated to be 260 billion barrels, about 1/4 of world oil reserves. Petroleum in Saudi Arabia is not only plentiful but under pressure and close to the Earth's surface. This makes it far cheaper and thus far more profitable to extract than oil at many other fields. The petroleum sector accounts for roughly 92.5% of Saudi budget revenues, 90% of export earnings, and 55% of GDP. Another 40% of GDP comes from the private sector. An estimated 7.5 million foreigners work legally in Saudi Arabia, playing a crucial role in the Saudi economy, for example, in the oil and service sectors. The government has encouraged private sector growth for many years to lessen the kingdom's dependence on oil, and to increase employment opportunities for the swelling Saudi population. In recent decades, the government has begun to permit private sector and foreign investor participation in sectors such as power generation and telecom, and acceded to the WTO. During much of the 2000s, high oil prices enabled the government to post budget surpluses, boost spending on job training and education, infrastructure development, and government salaries. More than 95% of all Saudi oil is produced on behalf of the Saudi government by the parastatal giant Saudi Aramco, and the remaining 5% by similar parastatal companies as of 2002. With its absolute monarchy system of government, large state sector and supply of welfare benefits, the Saudi economy has been described as a bewildering combination of a feudal fealty system and a more modern political patronage one. At every level in every sphere of activity, Saudis maneuver through life manipulating individual privileges, favors, obligations, and connections. By the same token, the government bureaucracy is a maze of overlapping or conflicting power center under the patronage of various royal princes with their own priorities and agendas to pursue, independence to satisfy. The gross domestic product of Saudi Arabia fluctuates dramatically according to the price of oil. For purchasing power parity comparisons, the US dollar is exchanged at 3.75 Saudi Arabian riyals only. Mean wages were $14.74 per man-hour in 2009. Population from Forecastat, UN World Population Prospects. The 2010 revision. As of August 2009, it was reported that Saudi Arabia is the strongest Arab economy, according to World Bank. History. Saudi Arabia was a subsistence economy until the 1930s. During the 1973 oil crisis, Saudi began to grow rapidly and peaked around 1980. In the mid-1980s, the oil price dropped from a high of $40 per barrel to around $5, and the county built up a massive overseas debt. From 2002 to mid-2008, oil prices recovered, allowing the government to post budget surpluses and boost spending. Saudi Arabia was an economy based on subsistence agriculture by a population that was largely nomadic and very poor until the discovery of oil in the 1930s. To raise the price of oil, Saudi Arabia and several other major exporters founded the Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries to regulate production. The first 5-year development plan was started in 1970. and these have continued sequentially so that 2015 will be the first year of the 10th plan. During the 1973 oil crisis, OPEC production cuts raised the price of petroleum from $3 per barrel to nearly $12. Saudi became one of the fastest-growing economies in the world. It enjoyed a substantial surplus in its overall trade with other countries, imports increased rapidly, and ample government revenues were available for development, defense, and aid to other Arab and Islamic countries. Another price jolt around 1980 during the Iran-Iraq War brought Saudi Arabia to what has been its economic peak. But higher oil prices led to development of more oil fields around the world and reduced global consumption. The result, beginning in the mid-1980s, was a worldwide oil glut, with the oil price dropping from a high of $40 per barrel to a low point of around $5. This introduced an element of planning uncertainty for the first time in a decade. Saudi oil production, which had increased to almost 10 million barrels per day during 1980-81, dropped to about 2 million barrels per day in 1985. Budgetary deficits developed, and the government drew down its foreign assets. Responding to financial pressures, Saudi Arabia gave up its role as the swing producer within OPEC in the summer of 1985 and accepted a production quota. Since then, Saudi oil policy has been guided by a desire to maintain market and quota shares. In June 1993, Saudi Aramco absorbed the state marketing and refining company, becoming the world's largest fully integrated oil company. Most Saudi oil exports move by tanker from oil terminals at Ras Tanura and Jumeirah in the Persian Gulf. The remaining oil exports are transported via the East-West pipeline across the kingdom to the Red Sea port of Yanbu. A major new gas initiative promises to bring significant investment by U.S. and European oil companies to develop non-associated gas fields in 3 separate parts of Saudi Arabia. Following final technical agreements with concession awardees in December 2001, development should begin in 2002. However, beginning in late 1997, Saudi Arabia again faced the challenge of low oil prices. Due to a combination of factors, the East Asian economic crises, a warm winter in the West caused by El Niño, and an increase in non-OPEC oil production, demand for oil slowed and pulled oil prices down by more than one-third. Saudi Arabia was a key player in coordinating the successful 1999 campaign of OPEC and other oil-producing countries to raise the price of oil to its highest level since the Gulf War by managing production and supply of petroleum. That same year, Saudi Arabia established the Supreme Economic Council to formulate and better coordinate economic development policies in order to accelerate institutional and industrial reform. Saudi Arabia acceded to the WTO in 2005 after many years of negotiations. Foreign investment. The mid-1980s was also the time that foreign ownership of business was allowed. In the mid-1990s, foreign ownership rules were relaxed again, with investment sought in telecommunications, utilities, and financial services. In 2000, 100% foreign-owned businesses were allowed in the kingdom. Diversification and the development plans. The government has sought to allocate its petroleum income to transform its relatively undeveloped, oil-based economy into that of a modern industrial state while maintaining the kingdom's traditional Islamic values and customs. Although economic planners have not achieved all their goals, the economy has progressed rapidly. Oil wealth has increased the standard of living of most Saudis. However, significant population growth has strained the government's ability to finance further improvements in the country's standard of living. Heavy dependence on petroleum revenue continues, but industry and agriculture now account for a larger share of economic activity. The mismatch between the job skills of Saudi graduates and the needs of the private job market at all levels remains the principal obstacle to economic diversification and development. About 4.6 million non-Saudis are employed in the economy. Saudi first began to diversify its economy to reduce dependency on oil in the 1970s as part of its first 5-year development plan. Basic petrochemical industries using petroleum as feedstock were developed. The fishing villages of Al Jubail on the Gulf and Yanbu on the Red Sea were developed. However, their effect on Saudi's national accounts has been small. Saudi Arabia's first 2 development plans, covering the 1970s, emphasized infrastructure. The results were impressive. The total length of paved highways tripled, power generation increased by a multiple of 28, and the capacity of the seaports grew tenfold. For the third plan, the emphasis changed. Spending on infrastructure declined, but it rose markedly on education, health, and social services. The share for diversifying and expanding productive sectors of the economy did not rise as planned, but the 2 industrial cities of Jubail and Yanbu, built around the use of the country's oil and gas to produce steel, petrochemicals, fertilizer, and refined oil products, were largely completed. In the fourth plan, the country's basic infrastructure was viewed as largely complete, but education and training remained areas of concern. Private enterprise was encouraged, and foreign investment in the form of joint ventures with Saudi public and private companies was welcomed. The private sector became more important, rising to 70% of non-oil GDP by 1987. While still concentrated in trade and commerce, private investment increased in industry, agriculture, banking, and construction companies. These private investments were supported by generous government financing and incentive programs. The objective was for the private sector to have 70% to 90% ownership in most joint venture enterprises. The fifth plan emphasized consolidation of the country's defenses, improved and more efficient government social services, regional development, and, most importantly, creating greater private sector employment opportunities for Saudis by reducing the number of foreign workers. The sixth plan focused on lowering the cost of government services without cutting them and sought to expand educational training programs. The plan called for reducing the kingdom's dependence on the petroleum sector by diversifying economic activity, particularly in the private sector, with special emphasis on industry and agriculture. It also continued the effort to Saudiize the labor force. The seventh plan focuses more on economic diversification and a greater role of the private sector in the Saudi economy. For 2004, the government aims at an average GDP growth rate of 3.16% each year, with projected growths of 5.04% for the private sector and 4.01% for the non-oil sector. The government also has set a target of creating 817,300 new jobs for Saudi nationals. Advertising expenditures have reached new peaks due to emphasis on value-added manufacturing. As part of its diversification, Saudi Arabia has been inking major refinery contracts with Chinese and other companies. Future plans: Saudi Arabia has announced plans to invest about $46 billion in 3 of the world's largest and most ambitious petrochemical projects. These include the $27 billion Ras Tanura Integrated Refinery and Petrochemical Project, the $9 billion Saudi Cayenne at the Wayback Machine Petrochemical Complex at Jubail Industrial City, and the $10 billion Petro Rabah Refinery Upgrade Project. Together, the 3 projects will employ more than 150,000 technicians and engineers working around the clock. Upon completion in 2015-16, the Ras Tanura Integrated Refinery and Petrochemicals Project will become the world's largest petrochemical facility of its kind, with a combined production capacity of 11 million tons per year of different petrochemical and chemical products. The products will include ethylene, propylene, aromatics, polyethylene, ethylene oxide, chlorine derivatives, and glycol. Saudi Arabia had plans to launch 6 economic cities, and are expected to contribute $150 billion to the economy. As of 2013, 4 cities were being developed. Employment. As of 2008, roughly 2/3 of workers employed in Saudi Arabia were foreigners, and in the private sector approximately 90%. In January 2014, the Saudi government claimed it had lowered the 90% rate, doubling the number of Saudi citizens working in the private sector employment to 1.5 million. According to Reuters, economists estimate only 30 to 40% of working-age Saudis hold jobs or actively seek work, although the official employment rate is only around 12%. Most Saudis with jobs are employed by the government, but the International Monetary Fund has warned the government cannot support such a large wage bill in the long term. The government has announced a succession of plans since 2000 to deal with the imbalance by "Saudizing" the economy. However, the foreign workforce and unemployment among Saudis has continued to grow. One obstacle is social resistance to certain types of employment. Jobs in service and sales are considered totally unacceptable for citizens of Saudi Arabia, both potential employees and customers. Non-petroleum sector. Saudi Arabia has natural resources other than oil, including small mineral deposits of gold, silver, iron, copper, zinc, manganese, tungsten, lead, sulfur, phosphate, soapstone and feldspar. The country has a small agricultural sector, primarily in the southwest where annual rainfall averages 400 mm. The country is one of the world's largest producers of dates. For some years it grew very expensive wheat using desalinated water for irrigation, but plans to stop by 2016. As of 2009, livestock population amounted to 7.4 million sheep, 4.2 million goats, 500,000 camels and 250,000 cattle. Although jobs created by the roughly 2 million annual Hajj pilgrims do not last long, the Hajj employs more people than the oil industry, 40,000 temporary jobs, and $2-3 billion in revenue. Private sector. Saudi Arabia's private sector is dominated by a handful of big businesses in the service sector, primarily in construction and real estate: Bin Laden, Olayan, Zamal, Mahfouz, and Al Raja. These firms are heavily dependent on government spending, which is dependent on oil revenues. From 2003 to 2013, several key services were privatized: municipal water supply, electricity, telecommunications, and parts of education and healthcare. Traffic control and car accident reporting were also privatized. According to Arab news columnist Abdulaziz Al-Uwaisheg, in almost every one of these areas, consumers have raised serious concerns about the performance of these privatized entities. Trade. In recent years, Saudi Arabia sought to join the World Trade Organization. Negotiations have focused on the degree to which Saudi Arabia is willing to increase market access to foreign goods and services and the time frame for becoming fully compliant with World Trade Organization obligations. In April 2000, the government established the Saudi Arabian General Investment Authority to encourage foreign direct investment in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia maintains a negative list of sectors in which foreign investment is prohibited, but the government plans to open some closed sectors such as telecommunications, insurance, and power transmission distribution over time. As of November 2005, Saudi Arabia was officially approved to enter World Trade Organization. List of trade organizations: World Trade Organization, International Monetary Fund, International Chamber of Commerce, International Organization for Standardization, World Customs Organization, Gulf Cooperation Council.